I know that if I try to master something or perfect it, I won't actually do it. So I'm totally comfortable with things not being perfect. I do a review of, okay, what are some of the tips I should think about to create a video, but it's usually not perfect. My whole goal is usually just to complete something and ship it.
Hey, welcome to Unleashed, the show that explores how to thrive as an independent professional. I'm your host, Will Bachman. Unleashed is produced by Umbrex, the first global community connecting top-tier independent management consultants with one another. I'd like to welcome Josh B., Lisa S., and Rick G., who all recently signed up to receive the weekly Unleashed email, which includes a summary of each episode, transcripts, and bonus materials. If you'd like to receive it too, send me a note at unleashed@umbrex.com. We just heard from today's guest, Paul Millard, who has been on the show before on episode 62, and it was great to welcome Paul back to hear what he has been up to. I am so inspired by Paul, who has been incredibly deliberate about designing his life. He's built a practice that allows him to work completely remotely. And he recently left home in Boston. He spent a stretch of time working in Bali and then in Japan, and now he's temporarily settled in Taiwan. He's developed several online courses with over 4,500 students on Udemy alone. He writes a very popular weekly newsletter that I love about the future of work. He's incredibly generous with his time. On his website, you can book time to have a curiosity conversation with Paul. He's spoken with hundreds of people around the world who have reached out to him in this way. So definitely check out Paul's website, think-boundless.com, which includes links to the courses he's developed, his writing, his weekly newsletter, has a link to schedule time with him there, and a list of his recommended reading. You can also follow Paul on Twitter at P_Millard, and that's spelled Millerd. Links in the show notes. Check out the consulting skills course that he created at strategyu.co. Paul has written one of the most authoritative articles on the evolution of consulting talent platforms, something that's interesting to a lot of listeners to this show. So I'll include a link to that piece in the show notes as well. Hello, Paul. It's great to have you back on the show.
Excited to be here. Will, let's dive in.
So, Paul, first I want to ask, you have been doing some traveling. What are the three most common questions that you get when you tell people that you've been working and living in Bali and Taipei?
Yeah, that's an interesting. So I don't know if I can come up with three on the spot, but I should be able to as a former strategy consultant, right?
They come in trees.
I think the first thing, people often kind of project their vision of how they'd react in that situation. A lot of people will say, oh, I wish I could do that, or I could never do that. And it's not as much about my journey. I think other things that people ask are, aren't you worried about finding work? A lot of worries about kind of work. And then we talked about this another time, but how would you do this if you had kids? Or is this something you're going to do long term? So there's a lot of questions. And the funny thing is, I have all these questions and I'm grappling with them every day. And it's funny how when I talk to people about taking this journey or path, which most people in my life know I'm on, it is a very intense moment for them often because they see all these stresses and things I've been worrying about for a few years now, all in one moment.
Right. And tell us a little bit about your travels there. So you were in Bali, I think, for 6 weeks, and you were doing projects while you were there. Or tell us where you've been traveling and what you've been doing on the road.
So 2.5 years ago, I took the leap to freelance consulting, and then was in New York for a bit, and then ended up moving to Boston, where I'd lived most of my 20s and some of my 30s. And I was working on a couple clients in Boston, both remotely. So I was doing work for them, but sitting at coffee shops at random places around Boston. And I was thinking to myself, well, maybe I should be a little more adventurous. So I ended up booking a 1 month trip to Asia, did some of the work I was doing for the client while still there. And I had never studied abroad or really lived abroad for an extended period, and really just had the imagination then to think to myself, well, why don't I try a longer trip? And that's what brought me to Asia last fall. I ended up meeting someone along the way and deciding to stay in Asia, but had plans as part of that plan to go back to Asia, to go to Bali, to actually meet up with a couple other freelancers I knew who were trying to spend some time together and work on creative projects.
I'm curious about some of the practicalities of this kind of global nomad lifestyle. What are some of the tips that you have about how to do this?
Yeah, so I think going off the default path brings up a lot of questions for anyone, right? I think even shifting from full time employment to independent working can be a dramatic shift in how you're orienting towards work and life. For many people, it raises the question of, well, if I don't have to go to work, how much do I want to work? And then if I can decide that, how much do I want to make? And those are the questions you're grappling with to an even more extreme degree. I think if you're prioritizing travel, so if you're saying I want to be location independent, you're adding an additional constraint, which is that you need to be able to do work from anywhere. Now, I've been mostly in Asia, so the time difference has been pretty consistent, but that's what I've been designing around. And being with a partner who's from Taiwan and I'm living with in Taiwan, I kind of know this is a longer term constraint. So it's really just thinking about what are you designing around, right? And I'm actually grateful for that constraint because it's very focusing. It helps me orient to say, okay, these are the type of consulting projects I can do. These are the kind of ventures or creative projects I want to experiment with that actually work with this life I'm trying to design and build.
I suppose in terms of some of the practical factors, there's depending on the country, I guess there's some visa issues. You have to get work permission to live abroad or work abroad.
Yeah, I'd say the hardest country to drop in and work as a nomad is probably the United States. So, leaving the United States is rather easy if you have a good passport, like from the US or other Western countries. Most of Asia, for example, you can come in for 90 days and work visa free, work remotely. I know Europe, in the main Western Europe areas, you can go for 90 out of
Hmm.
180 days, and you can just go back once that 180 days is lapsed. But what a lot of people do is kind of design around those and go to different parts of the world at different times to optimize around weather, instead of trying to optimize around like work per se or something like that.
In terms of your kind of just physical setup, have you kind of got a hotel room? Have you rented a room by the month? Or I've read about these kind of global nomad kind of co-working spaces. How have you physically set up your
So I've
work
been in an
and
apartment
living
since
space?
March, because I've decided to stay in Taiwan for a while. And before that, I was pretty much living month to month. You can rent things on Airbnb, or Facebook is actually fantastic for this. You go in, you drop in a group, search the place you're going, like Bali housing on Facebook. And you find these very vibrant communities where you can find locals who are looking for room to fill, or even other nomads who are sharing their space or renting out space short term. So it's been pretty easy. I was actually staying in a hotel that just opened when I was in Bali. I think it was running me about 430 a month, and that was through a connection. And that price was actually even a little high. So yeah, housing costs have been anywhere between 300 to 500 a month, which, as you can imagine, once you start lowering that kind of cost lower, you have a lot more freedom to design and experiment with different working modes.
Yeah, it's a little bit lower than New York City rent.
A little bit lower in New York.
Let's dive into some of the courses that you've developed. I'm super curious to hear about these. So you have two online courses, I think Reinvent and Think Like a Strategy Consultant. Tell me about both of those. I want to hear like what the courses are about, how you created them. Let's get into that.
Yeah, it might help to just start with the first online course I created, which was for a different purpose a few years ago, but that kind of gave me the confidence that there was something more there. Do you want me to talk about that a little first?
Yeah, absolutely. Sure, let's jump into that. Sure.
So I was doing some career coaching on the side, kind of dabbling with, okay, do I want to go off as a freelancer, coach, whatever, and learn from that? And one of the things people always reach out to you for is resume help, right? So I decided I just did not want to help people with resumes anymore, but I had developed all these materials and decided to develop this course. Now, this course is still up and I give this away for free. I can send you a link to it, but it gave me a taste of like what creating a course was like. And one of the things I learned through that process was the creation of the content created this higher level learning loop, which made me master the materials even better because I had to think not only about what I knew, but how do I explain this to somebody and in a simple way, in a way that's accessible. So I ended up putting that on Udemy, ended up giving it away for free, and like 100 people a month still take this course, which kind of just blew my mind and gave me this data point that was saying,
Wow.
okay, there are these people all around the world. I think 95 plus countries have taken this resume course. Now, this resume course is not all that impressive, but I think what blew me away and gave me this feedback to say, go a little deeper with this was that so many people all across the world were taking this.
And that course, by the
So,
way, is it
yeah, go ahead.
is it would love to hear a little bit what's involved in creating a course like that. Is it just lectures? Do you have lectures and then like a take a assignments? Is there downloadable stuff? What was involved in creating that course?
Yeah. So with that course, it gave me the kind of gave me this insight into this whole world I didn't really realize when I was just taking the leap to be a freelance consultant. So I was just thinking about, oh, I'll just become a freelance consultant. But this made me realize there are probably other paths to make money. I think just in the past 5 years, so many people have realized there's all these avenues to create things and sell them on the internet. So I ended up creating a consulting course. And last November, I ended up basically just devoting a month to creating this. And this was on feedback from people over the years, just sharing stuff I learned at consulting firms and teaching people. I did a couple small experiments with the mindset that I would create a course, and I prototyped some of the stuff with a client in Boston. But basically, take a lot of the content, kind of create an outline. I create massive amounts of presentations. I then will record my video if I'm speaking, and I'll do like short intros of just me speaking, and that's a video of me. And then there'll be lectures where I walk people through concepts. I use combination of audio, sometimes animations, sometimes diagrams or kind of fun transitions or images, and then basically put that all together. One of the first things I did with the consulting course last year was just give it away to a bunch of people for
Hmm.
free and said, hey, would you check out this course? What do you think? And just got a lot of feedback. I ended up selling, I think, 2 copies of the course, and then nobody really paid attention to it for several months. Kind of didn't really think anything of it. And actually, I ended up meeting someone in Bali who said to me, this is incredible. What are you doing? Why aren't you like putting this more out there? And that caused me to kind of double down on it and take it to the next level, which is kind of led me to a whole new way of thinking about courses as well.
Okay, so I have a bunch of questions about that. Um,
Yeah, we can dive in.
so the video of you speaking, I want to get into some of the nuts and bolts in this for people who are interested in. Well, okay, to be honest, for me. So the video of you speaking, how did you do those? Was that like just an iPhone looking into the camera? Did you have lights? Did you have someone helping you? How did you do those videos of you speaking?
Yeah, so at first it was just webcam of me and recorded on my
Hmm.
computer. And I used external mics that were pretty good. The same mic I'm using for this podcast,
Oh,
actually.
what mic is that?
Oh, this is the ATR 2100. It's a USB and mic that can be plugged in to a regular mixer as well.
All right. Okay,
I
cool.
think it's like $70 on Amazon.
All right, cool. Well, we'll include a link to that in the show notes. All right.
And I think there's a key thing here too, which is I just I know that if I try to master something or perfect it, I won't actually do it. So I'm totally comfortable with things not being perfect.
Mm-hmm.
I do a review of, okay, what are some of the tips I should think about to create a video, but it's usually not perfect. My whole goal is usually just to complete something and ship it.
Yeah, complete and ship.
And then what happens is people either purchase it or give me feedback. And then I go, this is not as good as I want. And I kind of try to take it to the next level incrementally.
Yeah. So I'm particularly interested in this because I just finished recording a course myself, and it was quite an adventure. I'm currently having it all edited, all these lectures. So I'm curious how you went about it. So you recorded this with a webcam, and then when you stepped it up, did you start recording with a phone, or did you get a digital and a DSLR, or what are you doing now to record video?
I still use webcam
Really? Yeah.
and a same microphone.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a lapel mic I use too. That's a Rode Smart Lav.
Yeah.
And for my course I just developed, Reinvent, I invested in a light, but I didn't do that just to like make everything perfect. I did it to raise the stakes on myself, to make an initial investment. It was kind of this ceremonial, we're getting started, let's start creating today.
All right.
We have the
We
light.
got the light.
Yeah. So I have been experimenting with that and using that. And that's been fun just to kind of raise the stakes and continue to improve. Um,
What about
but yeah, it's pretty simple setup. I don't try to overcomplicate these things.
when you speak to the camera? I'll admit, I first tried to use a teleprompter app and was trying to write what I wrote for this course and then read it off a teleprompter. But then my eyes were flickering back and forth from the iPad to the camera. It just was no good. So I ended up having to kind of write the stuff, but then memorize it enough that I could just ad lib it to the camera. How do you do like the actual recording piece? Do you just sort of make notes of what you want to say and then just talk?
Yeah, so it's notes and say what I want to say.
Mm-hmm.
I was trying to overcomplicate this using video editors and my iPhone camera because it was better. And then I went back to the webcam and actually started using PowerPoint. You can record video in PowerPoint and go slide by slide in a way that you can put the video wherever you want on the slide. You can make it bigger, smaller, and you can record one slide at a time, which is really nice because you don't have to memorize a whole bunch of material.
That's interesting. I hadn't heard of people doing that. So so you'll actually show the PowerPoint on your screen, and then you're recording using PowerPoint, Microsoft PowerPoint to record.
Yeah, so I have my webcam set off to the side, I have the light set up, and then I have my microphone plugged into the computer with an extension, and then I am back to a wall talking to the camera.
Wow.
And then once you record the video, you can trim the video and trim the slide timings in PowerPoint, and you are good to go.
How do you do the animations?
So I don't get overly, I don't get too excited with the animations. I basically try to add fun elements, trying to think about how do you make people laugh or make them focus on what you're trying to talk about. I don't get too detailed with the slides. It's usually big words or graphics or quotes. And I'll use the animations just to like highlight key phrases as I'm talking.
Mm-hmm.
And I can control the timing so they pop up in yellow when I'm talking about it or red or something like that. So yeah, I've experimented with a bunch of different things. I think every time I create this, I'm always coming up with new ideas. And it's part of why I love doing this is as you're creating, it gives you the framework for coming up with more ideas and you're kind of creating and upping your game as you go.
Yeah. So let's talk about the course itself a little bit. So you sold 2 copies, and then someone you met in Bali said, "This is fantastic. You should put some energy behind it." What did you do then to promote the course and raise awareness of it to get more customers?
Yeah, so I knew there was interest and a desire to understand these skills because I had basically been offering free workshops to like founders, people I would meet over the previous 2 years. I was also advising an undergrad consulting group where I was like so frustrated on how do you teach consulting skills to undergrads doing real projects,
Mm-hmm.
and basically figured out how to dumb down enough of what I knew in my brain to explain some of these things, and then had tested it at a client and was getting good feedback. So I knew there was demand, and had written like a few articles on consulting. And basically, what did was spin out those articles into a site called Strategy U and built a site around it and started writing a bunch of articles. I think I wrote like 10 to 15 articles about strategy consulting
Mm-hmm.
and really just dove in. And that was a way for me to even learn more. From the writing, I came up with more ideas that I then put back into the course to continually improve the content. And I'm always adding more and more content and improving it. So I did that, put it over there, and we did a couple experiments with like creating a email mini course and giving people a preview of the course. We did a free workshop online and also experimented with ads, but we didn't even spend that much on ads and ended up started getting a bunch of sales. And it was just kind of happening organically. And people were giving me good feedback, reaching out. And it was kind of this virtuous cycle that once this was happening, and I think around June this past year, it was the first like 2 months in a row that I was covering my cost of living, which is not high. It's not a high cost of living, but it was like, oh, wow, if this can support my living, maybe I double down on it. This could be really something that sustains this kind of life of living and working remotely all around the world.
So you would be giving some free workshops, and how would you kind of spread awareness of those? Was it just like posting it on LinkedIn, or do you have an email list now that you send stuff to, or would you reach out individually, proactively to people? Like, how would you spread the word of these different free workshops and things?
Yeah, it was a mix of those three. I think my general demeanor in everything I do is I actually just love making friends. And that's what is so energizing about being on my own is kind of free association with the type of work and type of people I get to collaborate with. I'm pretty much always looking for people to help. So instead of thinking in goals of I need to make X amount this quarter, it's okay, who can I help this week? Who are the communities I want to engage with? How can I reach out to people and offer things? And I've done that so often, and it so often leads to things I actually want to be doing and can make money from, that it's basically my only model for thinking about sustaining this kind of life and business. So yeah, it was a mix of those three: posting on social, reaching out to friends, but it was always small things. It was never more than 2 to 5 people.
Hmm. Hmm. Okay, let's talk about your new course. So you have this one course to think like a strategy consultant. And by the way, people can find that. Where's the best place for people to find that course?
So they can find a link to that at strategyu.co.
And strategy U, that's YOU or strategy like U period.
Strategy U, it's just the U,
All right.
university.
All right. So we'll include that link in the show notes, strategyu.com.
Co.co.
Oh, .co. Okay, strategyu.co. All right. And the, tell us about your new course.
Yeah, so it's worth mentioning. Once I got a bunch of people starting to sign up for this consulting course, I wanted to raise the stakes even further and run a live cohort of it.
Okay.
So, what I was learning from online learning is people sign up for these courses, they don't complete them.
Yeah.
And I was trying to figure out how do I raise the stakes on both ends? One, to for me to just create an exceptional experience, and two, such that people, when they purchase, are actually going to finish. So I did a live cohort of the course in, I believe it was August this year.
Okay.
And so basically shut down registration and said, if you want to sign up, it's for the live cohort kicking off in August. I created 4 live workshops. I created 3 assignments that were pretty demanding. And then we used the live calls to basically model what a team room environment might feel like in McKinsey. So we're working on a problem statement, we're collaborating, we're challenging each other, we're trying to figure out what this looks like. And that just kind of blew my mind open because people reacted so positively to that experience and being involved in the live learning sessions that said, okay, maybe online learning is really part of something I want to be investing in and doing over the next 2 to 5 years and not just this one off course.
Mm-hmm.
So in August, I decided after that course was done to create this course that had kind of been simmering in the back of my head called Reinvent. And this was based on another experiment I ran the previous year, which I called Solopreneur Shift. So a year ago, I had been doing all this kind of pro bono helping work with people navigating the leap to freelance consulting and navigating solopreneurship, and put a landing page up. This is a year ago. I didn't have a course. I said, I'll take you through a 4-week experiment. We'll do 4 live calls. We'll do these exercises. Here's the outline. And got 8 people to sign up at like varying price points. Some I gave as a gift, some paid a higher price. And that basically, like, that buy-in said, okay, people want this. Now that they've signed up, I'm going to create the content. I had some of the frames of it, but I created the content and did that. That was a positive experience. And didn't do anything with it for a year until this past August when I decided, okay, I want to really take that and turn that into an online course based on what I was learning with the strategy consulting course. So yeah, I've been a bit of a course creator over the past couple of years, and none of it was really planned. It was really always just, how do I experiment in new ways of using the internet, video, bringing people together, and trying to solve all these things that seem to be emerging at the same time.
And give us the kind of overview of the Reinvent course.
Yeah, so this is designed for reimagining your relationship with work, which comes from like conversations I've had with many people who have gone off the default path. People who are independent consultants, people who are solopreneurs, entrepreneurs, taking sabbaticals, remote workers. And basically what many people are discovering is that they're moving from a full-time environment in which their life was designed and oriented around a job. And then they move to these other environments and they don't really have a lens to navigate this new space. How do I think about carving a career without a career path? I mean, you've been navigating this for years now, but many people haven't, right? And they're new to this space. Even remote working is doing this because it removes the constraints of even having to be in a certain location, even though you still have a full-time job. So I started combining a lot of these exercises I was doing with people. I've basically been doing coaching on the side as a gift. So I do a lot of pro bono discussions with people. I call them curiosity conversations. So I have had probably 1 or 2 of these every week for the past 2 or 3 years. And learning from those, creating experiments for people, writing about this. And so Reinvent was basically the way to take the past 2 to 3 years and turn it into something. So I created a 4-week roadmap of lectures. I published that. I shared that on Twitter, on Facebook, and said, hey, anyone have any comments? I'm going to create this in public and show you how I'm creating it along the way. So I still have a big tweet storm you can follow of my creation process. And through that, got a bunch of people to sign up. And it was kind of a collaborative co-creation experience. And at the same time, just taking everything that was kind of dancing around in my head, making sense of it and turning it into something I was kind of proud to put down and be able to give away to people in the future, and also experiment with running this course around the world, either in person or virtually.
Can you give us some examples of some of the exercises that you've included in that course?
Yeah, so the course is designed around one big shift. So, for example, the shift could be I'm experimenting with taking a leap to freelance consulting in the next 6 months. And I'm going to use the next 4 weeks to kind of try on this shift. One of the big things it's centered around is what I call an action challenge. So, the goal of an action challenge is not to write a book, for example. It's to challenge yourself in 1 week to do something bold that puts you outside your comfort zone, that helps you understand what you actually like about moving towards that goal. So it could be writing a chapter or something. It could be reaching out to a publisher. It could be telling people you're writing a book, and then figuring out what do you like about that and where do you want to go next. Another exercise is the best self challenge, where people have to email like 3 to 5 friends and say, when have you seen me at my best self? So it's really a combination of like personal development. There's things around figuring out your ideal lifestyle cost. There's another exercise around designing your life, another one around fear setting. And it's really designed to be like a really intense course, like really high standards, really a lot of things you need to kind of reflect, read, respond to, do in the course. And we do it together as a group we have a chat room on Discord, and we also have 5 weekly calls.
Sounds fascinating. Tell us a little bit more about the best self exercise and what sorts of, so practically, how does that work if a listener wants to go ahead and try that? And what are some of the
Yeah.
things people have learned or insights they've gained from it?
Yeah, it's we were just talking about this yesterday on the call. So one of the insights people have is that they're terrified to send emails asking people either for help or feedback. And this almost categorically, people get 100% responses to these within a day. It's almost as if people are craving, like asking for feedback and more intimate and vulnerable relationships between people. So I definitely encourage people to try this. I've done it a few times over the past couple of years. And I think the most interesting things are just realizing there are these great things we're doing that we're not aware of. They're kind of just who we are, right? And you do them over and over again. And then somebody's like, this is when you're being your best self. You're like, oh, wow. I never even really thought about that.
Yeah, as you talk about it, I'm just reflecting. It's interesting, even just to consider yourself of when are you at your best self and what really makes you come alive, and adds a nice layer. I think imagine it adds a really interesting layer to ask other people to reflect on that. To tell you, to get that outside perspective. You have written a lot and thought quite deeply about talent platforms. In fact, I think that if someone Googles talent platform, some of your writing is on the first page. Tell me a little bit about your thought process and what you've been thinking about in terms of talent platforms.
My first job after business school was working for one of these early talent platforms called A Connect. And these were a number of firms that were established in the early 2000s. There's Eden McCallum, Business Talent Group, A Connect. And this was kind of early internet, right? You were getting some information, you were able to store talent profiles in databases and connect people globally. And I worked for one of these firms. So I was really fascinated with the space. While I was there, I was kind of doing a mapping of what are the competitors in the space, what are the emerging trends. And one of the emerging trends when I was there, this was back in 2013, there's this firm called MBA and Company, which is now called Talmix.
Mm-hmm.
And they created the first two-sided platform. So a one-sided platform is when the firm, the talent platform, knows the client and the client projects, right? But the talent doesn't actually see inside that. They don't know what the pipeline is. They don't know what the opportunities are. And Talmix was creating the first two-sided platform. And I thought this was going to be revolutionary because it was going to dramatically increase the opportunities. People were going to be able to see independents, were going to have more control over their opportunities. And long story short, I think I was wrong about that. But it's been interesting to see the shift. I think you've seen a ton of two-sided platforms enter the space.
Mm-hmm.
And no one's really taken off, right? We're operating in a world in which if you're able to reach escape velocity on a platform, think of Facebook, and dominate the whole market, there are then benefits because everyone's on the platform, right? So these are the arguments places like Amazon and Facebook use, right? Because they control everything. The benefits are tremendous because everyone uses the platform. There's one point of reference. What happened with the talent platforms 2.0, as I call them, the two-sided platforms, was that a number of them entered the space. And I think the short-term effects were it dramatically increased the opportunities to freelancers. But then more freelancers entered the market, and there was almost this equilibrium reached, and it was suddenly more competitive for freelancers. I know many of the people that probably listen to the show have experienced this. I had a ton of Embrex people reach out to me after I published my article, The Failed Promise of Talent Platforms. And essentially, it's more competitive. And what's happened is the two sided platforms, what was at first an innovation on the operation side to outsource all the work to the freelancer, right? Instead of screening, vetting, and scoping the project, now the freelancer does that. But the freelancer is competing with 25 other freelancers, so it doesn't put a lot of effort into it. And you basically have all these projects which aren't scoped or vetted. Nobody knows if they're real. People lose trust in the platforms, and then people kind of get disillusioned. And then you have this second effect of like the best freelancers are all realizing this and saying, well, I don't want to use the platform. So there's almost this short term boost in the number of projects and opportunities. But then as more platforms and more freelancers entered the market, it was kind of worse for everyone. And you've seen this like firms like Catalent. At first, people were really excited by Catalent. Now, their business model is not even oriented towards freelancers anymore. They're trying to sell a talent management platform for companies to use internally, which, if you think about it, is just a much bigger business opportunity because you're looking at the entire employed workforce as opposed to a pretty small portion of freelance consultants.
Yeah. How do you see this whole space evolving?
So I'm not sure if you've read the article, but at the end, I'm optimistic about collaborations like Umbrex. I really think the opportunities are when you're aligned on the incentives, right? I think one of the challenges with two sided platforms is the incentives are aligned for employees, investors, and the clients, but the freelancer's not part of that formula. I think what you're doing with something like Umbrex, you're clearly like want to share in the upside in any freelancers. You share knowledge, you create things for freelancers, and you're trying to create this virtuous loop where it's kind of a smaller closed community. It's selected around certain characteristics. And it's saying your goal is not to be a VC backed scaling platform, right? It's to really deliver on a mission of increasing opportunities for freelancers. So I think you're seeing more and more of these sprout up across different industries, different geographies. So I think that's probably the most optimistic side. I honestly don't know what's going to happen with the two sided platforms. LinkedIn is obviously the $1 billion beast in this question, but I just think they haven't really figured out how to do it. But it's definitely something that's going to keep evolving and changing. And I don't really have clear answers.
Yeah. Yeah, LinkedIn has made little baby steps toward it with the Pro Finder and so forth, but that seems to really not be taking off at all. I don't really see anybody using it, and occasionally I'll see
Right.
project posted
Yeah,
there,
they're
but they're
not
always
great.
like unvetted, small little wimpy projects. There's no cost to post there, so there's just nobody serious, I think, is using that I've seen.
Yeah, and I think reflecting back on my time in AConnect, you realize that they were onto something. It wasn't scalable what they were doing, but for good reason because scoping a project is extremely hard, right? Anyone that's worked in consulting knows that scoping a project is probably one of the most important things. And how did they do that? They hired ex consultants to scope the projects, which is a really in demand talent pool, and it's hard to build a firm around that, right? So you just don't find a lot of ex consultants that want to work in a freelance staffing consulting firm. There's some, but it's just
Hmm.
limited. And I think
Yeah.
another thing worth noting, and you'll probably resonate with this, is I had multiple founders of platforms reach out to me after I wrote this article, and they want to know what can we do? And I said, well, what do you think freelancers care about? And all of them say something like client opportunities and money, and they're missing a whole lens. And this really gets to kind of how work is changing. They're missing a human side of work, right? Most freelancers are trying to design a life. They want to know that they're not going to go broke and there are opportunities, but usually their number one priority is not like maximizing income. It's usually interesting projects. It's usually freedom to work on other creative ventures, freedom to spend time with family, do other things that are meaningful in their life. And there's still just a disconnect between understanding this gig world and people that are running a business. Like one platform executive said to me, well, it's great that like freelancers care about these things, but what are the business sense to me? How do we think about the bottom dollar, right? And he was talking about hosting events, and obviously you figured this out. You send a newsletter with packed full of information and value every week, and you're just giving value, right? You're trying to invest in trust and generosity rather than say what's the business impact here.
Yeah, it's not about not about like trying to sell cottonseed oil or something, right? You know, I think the firms that focus purely on just the purely on just trying to, the project opportunities alone, it's not, not creating community, not engaging people, and people sense that.
Yeah, I challenge the platforms. I've said this to multiple founders and people working at these firms. I say, if you care so much about freelancers, just tell them they can come work at your office anytime. And they're like, I don't know if we can do that. People take advantage of it. And it's like, well, you're missing the point here, right? You need to operate in a framework of trust in the gig economy, which is super vitally important to winning over gig workers and freelancers and creating these feedback loops of saying, oh, this person offered me space 2 years ago. Why don't I throw them a project?
Tell me a little bit about these curiosity calls that you do. I'm curious to hear what what those are about, what you've learned by them. Tell me a little bit about those curiosity calls.
Brian Grazer wrote a book called A Curious Mind, and he directed several movies. The movies are slipping off the top of my head right now, but he wrote this book called A Curious Mind, in which he said his whole approach to his career was try to find interesting people and ask them if they could have curiosity conversations. And he would always say the same thing. He would say, I want to have a curiosity conversation. I don't want anything from you. I just want to hear your story, right? And he would say this to higher ups in his organization and in the movie business. And people were like, oh, that's different. Let's do this. And he would never ask for anything after. But anyone, and you know this through running a podcast, if you do this, you actually learn it about somebody's story in a genuine way, they feel this sense of gratitude and connectedness to you. So he credits a lot of his career success to this. So I decided to implement this in my own work and just said, anyone can call me for any reason and I'll chat with you for 45 minutes and let's just see what happens. And that's led to friendships. It's led to people I engage with about my writing and ideas. And it's really just been fun because it doesn't have this, well, you need to network and you need to make money. Um, adds a little bit of fun and randomness to the journey.
And how do you practically, do you have some kind of scheduling link, or how do you set those up?
Yeah, it's through Calendly. So I have a link in my site, and it's usually 2 days a week. I have certain time blocks,
Hmm.
and I just let people schedule at will. So I had one earlier today, and he was a Brazilian guy working in Berlin, working on some online courses, ran across my story and wanted to just kind of share ideas and see what we could explore together.
You talked before about, and I know how passionate you are about helping people along their journey. You've done a lot of coaching. Tell me a little bit about that. Are there kind of a set of go-to questions that you start with, or a standard process that you follow? Just tell me a little bit about that coaching and how you help people, you kind of scope out their journey.
Yeah, so I've decided not to pursue coaching as a central thing, mostly because if you're doing it with a lot of clients, it kind of becomes a grind. And then the incentives didn't really feel right to me, which is you want to have people have as many calls as possible. And I just thought other people can do that better than me. Oftentimes, I start with a curiosity call. That's how they find out about me, and then we just stay engaged. One thing I've realized is that people that reach out to me are typically not the what are the 10 steps I need to make a build $100,000 business, right? The people that reach out to me are typically the hey, there's a little bit more to life. How can I think about this while still being practical about business and making money, but thinking about a broader perspective? So, what I've found is that there's kind of these four phases that people go through, and I think about them along these four phases. And I wrote an article about this, but the four phases are restlessness, imagination, first steps, and then commitment. And I think for many people, there's a short term cycle along these phases, especially people that are working on their own, and then like a longer term cycle. So I know for me, before I left my job, there was this probably 5 to 7 year explorative phase of just being restless and slowly broadening my imagination and then experimenting, taking those first steps, and then probably realizing in the past 2 years that this is a longer journey I want to be on. Uh, and then there are kind of micro cycles where I experience that with like the reinvent course, for example. I kind of have a restlessness, feel like I need to do something. There's imagination. Somebody makes a comment or says, why don't you do this? And then I kind of take first steps and then commit to it and follow through. So I've been seeing that over and over again. I'd be interested to see if that resonates with your own journey as well.
So my own journey is, I left McKinsey. I took a full time job for a few months, and then I realized that that was not a great fit. And then I left that role, and that was August of 2008. And folks of a certain age will recall that Lehman Brothers was exploding, and that was not the best time to go look for a consulting job. So I probably didn't follow that standard 4-part model, or at least it was super compressed, because I think there's maybe a slightly there's probably an alternate model where people kind of fall into independent consulting, where I hadn't really heard about it. I managed to get a consulting gig with a Fortune 500 company, serving the CEO of all things. Someone just introduced me, and it worked out awesome. I managed to make in 2 weeks what I had been making in 2 months at McKinsey. So I said, well, this is kind of interesting. And then I was able to get another follow-on gig through one of the kind of intermediaries, and did that for a couple months, and then got my own project. And then so after about 3 or 4 months of independent consulting, I said, well, this is awesome. I get my freedom. I'm enjoying the work. I make as much money or more than I did before. So I'm just going to do this. So, um, so people who kind of have a safe, secure, full-time job and are thinking about it, pondering, should I make this jump to independent consulting?
Right.
That wasn't my experience. I kind of got thrown into it and then found out this really works well for me. But I can imagine that if you're not kind of forced into it, then it would be you kind of a little bit harder to make the leap.
Yeah, and I think there doesn't have to be like this painful like this is not right. I need to make a move. It can almost be
Yeah.
this like imagination of there could be different ways to do this. Are there different paths? And I'm wondering if you experienced some of this in starting Umbrex. Like, was there an initial kind of curiosity or frustration, and then a way you kind of took action on it?
Yeah, so that was a little bit of a process where I had been, very early on, right after starting my own practice, I knew how to be a consultant from 5 years at McKinsey, but I didn't know the first thing about running a consulting practice. How do you do accounting? How do you get insurance? How do you get life insurance? Contracts? How do you write a statement of work? So I didn't know any of that stuff. And I figured if it would be, I had read this book Tribes by Seth Godin right around that time. We talked about building, a tribe of your, kind of peers. And I didn't know how to do, run a consulting practice. So I started reaching out to folks that had left McKinsey a little bit before I had, Joaquin Fisher, Rosina Samadani, and some others who helped get me started. And then I figured that would be helpful. So for a number of years, it was just connecting with other independent consultants, sharing lessons learned. And then in 2013, some Mary Kate Scott got introduced to me. She had been organizing some in-person events for independent consultants, and she invited me to help her organize one that year, and I did. And then after that, it was organized more in-person events for a couple of years. So, had been doing a lot of the things of trying to connect independent consultants, help share lessons learned, help people collaborate. And then in 2015, some people were saying like, "Hey, you're doing these events, but there's no website, there's no name to it." And Jane Lang helped, had convinced me to like, okay, let's do this. But the tough thing I think was not so much necessarily resistance to it, but it's tough when you're out there trying to execute on projects,
Right.
and you're doing, independent consulting gigs to carve out the time and energy and focus to do some other experiment or set up something. So that was probably the biggest challenge, was not necessarily like reluctance or
Yeah.
it was just kind of carving out the time and energy to do something like that.
Well, it's funny. A lot of people I talk to, they'll look back and something they do, like maybe Umbrex is like this for you, seem obvious looking back. And it's often like the friends around you or community around you that kind of force it onto you.
Yeah.
Sounds like that might have happened a little with Umbrex, which is, I mean,
No,
that's the best way it happens.
that's right. And then you wonder how many sort of obvious things did you not do, right?
Yeah.
That you could have done. But certainly having other people, encourage was super important and helpful. So, what are some kind of pieces of advice that you'd give to somebody who's in that, maybe that restless phase of how to go beyond just sort of pondering things and kind of moving to the imagination or the first step space?
Yeah. So I'm still trying to figure out what the right names of those are for. But one of the interesting things I've noticed over and over again is either a book, like you read Tribes, a conversation, a travel trip, and sometimes it's forced upon you either through a health crisis or getting laid off. But thinking about what are these ways you can kind of shift perspective, shift state of mind, shift language, shift the conversation to kind of broaden the possibilities. One of the things I do with people is a designing your life activity. And this is adapted from the Design Your Life book. But the goal is to come up with 3 life designs, 5-year maps of your life. And the goal is not to pick a 5-year plan like some employers still ask people. It is to generate new ideas. So it's to challenge yourself to dream in a wider perspective, right? Because most people can come up with, okay, here's what my 5-year plan looks like. And so you do one plan, which is your life, but a little more experimental. Then you do like, what is your craziest possible life? And then a third one is like, what if no one would laugh? And then you can do other ones. You can do what does a freelancer life look like? What does a novelist life look like? And start just experimenting and pushing yourself to dream in new directions and do that through writing.
I like that idea of starting with the writing piece, of writing it out. And what's insightful for me from what you just said is not just doing one, but
Yeah, it's
forcing
that's the
yourself to do
power.
multiple. Because if you do one, it just kind of doing multiple forces you to come up with like this range of ideas as opposed to here's my one ideal thing. I love that.
Yeah, you could do this with your clients. I mean, what would be the 5-year strategy if no one would laugh at you, right? A lot of business creativity is limited because executives are worried about what their CEO or board's going to think of them.
Hmm.
What is the broadest possible imagination? And whenever I say this to business leaders, they get scared, but I love throwing the challenge out there.
Now, Paul, some people may, who listen to this show might ask, and I'm curious as well. beyond creating these courses, doing all these goals, are you doing any more kind of traditional kind of management consulting stuff right now? Are you doing a industry market landscape due diligence kind of stuff, or curious what sorts of independent consulting work you're doing outside of what we talked about so far on the show?
Yeah, so a lot of my freelance consulting dried up moving 12 hours away. I think
Mm-hmm.
there's just so much benefit to being in local networks. And I basically, with the low cost of living, decided to experiment on creative projects, and the strategy consulting course kind of took off. I did one project earlier this year where I was helping an Australian company think about entering the US market, and I was working on a global team. I realized I didn't want to work on team projects globally. There's just too much frustration. You wake up and everyone's freaking out. So I've moved towards more one-on-one kind of like coaching consulting, and it's actually happened through the consulting stuff. So I'm working with a couple clients now who are senior executives who are either delivering strategies or developing presentations. One's developing it for her board. At the next, she was just appointed to a senior position, is presenting it to her board. So it's combining these strategy consulting things that are emerging for me and the one-on-one coaching and working with people one-on-one. I'm seeming to really enjoy that. I haven't got it to a sustainable point yet, but I really just keep focusing on one engagement at a time and trying to just do great work for people and get feedback from them and have them tell me what I should do next.
And where are all the sites? And we'll include these links in the show notes that people can find you. So we talked about strategy and then the letter u.co for that course. You also have think-boundless, right? Are there other, what's the best way for people to find all your stuff online?
Yeah, if you go to think-boundless.com, you'll find me. And I'm pretty easy to track down. I put all my socials up there. I put my curiosity conversation links. So you can find me on LinkedIn too. I'm pretty easy to access. But yeah, think-boundless.com or strategyu.co. And honestly, love sharing ideas and helping people. So if people want to reach out, let's jump on a curiosity conversation and see what happens.
Fantastic. And did we mention this already? I'm talking to you today. I'm in New York City, and you are today in
I am in Taipei.
Taipei. All right. And you plan to be there for the intermediate near-term future?
So I'll be here for, I think, another 4 months. And then me and my partner are thinking about taking a year-long trip traveling around the world. So
That is amazing.
continuing to explore and experiment with these adventures and creations.
So we should. Are you gonna? Would you plan to kind of be blogging that trip and documenting so we can follow you around? And
I will be, yeah, it'll be on think-boundless.com. And I do a weekly newsletter as well, where I write around like the history, philosophy, and of work and creative adventures I'm experimenting with. So I do that you can find that through my Think-Boundless, and also do a weekly 5 reads email every Sunday as well. So yeah, pretty easy to find. I write all over the place, and you can follow along.
Paul, thanks so much. It's been fantastic catching up with you again, and I am so inspired by the range of activities and the course you've created and the writing. So thank you so much for being on the show.
Thanks, Will.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Unleashed, the show that explores how to thrive as an independent professional. Unleashed is sponsored by Umbrex, the world's first global community of top-tier independent management consultants. The mission of Umbrex is to create opportunities for independent management consultants to meet, share lessons learned, and collaborate. I'd love to get your feedback and hear any questions that you'd like to see us answer on this show. You can email me at unleashed@umbrex.com. That's UMBREX.com. If you found anything on the show helpful, it would be a real gift if you would let a friend know about the show and take a minute to leave a review on iTunes, Google Play, or Stitcher. And if you subscribe, our show will get delivered to your device every Monday. Our audio engineer is Dave Nelson. Our theme song was composed by Gary Negbauer, and I'm your host, Will Bachman. Thanks for listening.